straight run up.
Now he angles it somewhat. Barkadash!
Where do I start? It's been up and down.
I remember being a kid.
I can see that happening.
That's something, there's always something to do. The Unlaced.
Unlaced podcast. It's actually not bad.
And we're live. Welcome back, everyone, to the Unlaced podcast. We've got a bit of a unique week coming up. Everyone knows my love for football. Everyone knows my love for the A-League. Obviously, I did get some time to play in it and obviously still watch it very closely. So we do some documentation around the A-League. And we've got the new season coming up, November 19th, Game 1. And I thought before the season, it would be best to do a bit of a preview, a bit of an overview. And we've got a bit of an A-League double coming up. And today's a very special one because I'm joined by a man who I think knows that I go for Manchester United because he's jumped on the call with a Man City top. But Simon Hill, arguably the voice of Australian football for the last 15 years. How are you doing, mate?
I'm very good, especially after our derby win against your mob at the weekend where we played you off the park.
Absolutely. I think we got in the box like 3 or 4 times was one of the stats. So that just says it all.
I read a stat today that said United had in the second half 1 touch inside City's penalty area.
Oh, that's scary. That's when you know. That's when you know. But no, mate, it's good to see you. You're looking very healthy. And as we just spoke before we jumped on live, very happy to have you back in the game and calling the games as we're so used to in this country. So
thank you.
We've got a lot to unpack, everyone listening in and tuning in, because we are going to preview the upcoming A-League season, as I've said, for 2021-2022. And this is a bit of an honour for me, Simon, because I think I was like 11 or 12 years old when you were calling the games of the A-League. So I'm so used to hearing your voice calling. And now
that makes me feel very old, Jake.
Well, I don't know if you've aged, but it's a bit of a surreal moment. So no, I'm really looking forward to this discussion. But before we kick into things, there's obviously been, or before we go into previewing, I guess, the season, there's been a bit of a huge movement and change since the last season from a broadcast perspective, which now you're a part of the new team with Channel 10 and Paramount. I mean, what's that been like? What's that sort of early phase been like? You must be pretty happy to be back on board in the A-League and being a part of such a cool team.
Yeah, well, first of all, obviously, it's a relief to be back in employment because the last 12 months were pretty tough.
Yeah.
After I left Fox, but as I was saying to you before we came on air, I was sustained really by the support of the football community who've been absolutely brilliant with me.
That was crazy, wasn't it?
Very well, as they didn't have to be that way. Yeah. They could have ignored me and said, "Okay, well, you've had your stint," but they didn't. They sort of, kept me front and center. Obviously, I was still involved in the game on a peripheral level. I was doing podcasts and I was writing stuff for various outlets, Opta Sport, The Guardian, what have you. So, I was still sort of around the traps, but it was a tough year. And, I think I've said this on quite a few occasions that around November time last year, getting work was difficult and we all got bills to pay. And I'd made the decision to go back to the UK. It had got to that point and I just thought, maybe my time here is done. So I got my travel exemption through. I kicked my tenant out of my flat in London, and essentially I was set to get on the plane. And then the big COVID spike happened in the UK, and of course at that point none of us were vaccinated in Australia. So I thought maybe I'll just tough it out for another couple of months and go in January or February when things had eased a bit. And of course by then, things had started to change a little bit with the broadcast landscape here. So when went over to Channel 10, obviously I was interested, and fortunately enough, they were interested in me. So yeah, it's been great so far. I mean, it's early days. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do, and we've got a lot of hard work ahead of us to try and get the A-Leagues, both men and women, where we want them to go. But I can tell you, Channel 10 and Paramount Plus are mad keen. They've invested a lot of money over a long period of time. So, I'm pretty confident that we're heading in the right direction.
It was just to touch on your comment, like for everyone listening, Simon Hill's been calling football for a very long time. And I do want to actually acknowledge Fox for all the work and the broadcasting that they did initially. But to focus on the future, I mean, do you see any big shifts coming from, I guess, the broadcast or the Paramount and Channel 10 direction that maybe we're not used to? Is there sort of a new way that we're going to be seeing the football, or is it just kind of a fresh scene for us to expect?
Well, look, I mean, you don't want to completely reinvent the wheel. There's a way of broadcasting football, and as you rightly pointed out, Fox did it very well for many, many years. So, you're not going to see something completely new, but there will be tweaks around the edges. Obviously, there's some new faces as well. But I think the biggest, bonus for the game, and we're seeing this already, is that Channel 10 bring that free-to-air component, and along with that, promotion of the game. I think only yesterday, Tara Russian, who's also come across from Fox, was a guest host on Have You Been Paying Attention? We had Josh Cavallo last week on the back of his big announcement on the project. On the back of the Melbourne Cup coverage, there was immediately a 1-minute advert for the A-Leagues. Now that's priceless stuff for our competition and our game that we, with respect, have not had before. So I think it all helps. As I say, we're unfortunately starting from pretty low base because the competitions have sort of dropped away in terms of interest over the last few years, and there's been various reasons for that. But as I say, I'm hopeful, and there is a lot of work ahead. But I'm hopeful that with Channel 10 and Paramount Plus on board, and a renewed partnership with the new Australian Premier Leagues, of course, who've unbundled now from the FA. That partnership is going to deliver much better results than we've seen over the last few years.
All right. I'm excited for the combination. As you mentioned, it's a very diverse group that's going to be broadcasting across both the men and women's. How are you going to handle Archie? I feel like that's one that you've got to rein in every now and then, because as much as Archie is entertainment, there must be an element of you as I feel the leader of that group to bring him on board and keep him in line.
Oh, look, Archie's great. I worked with Archie, obviously, for quite a few years at Fox as well. So I love him like a brother. It's great to have him involved. And you need different personalities, people who bring different things to the table. And Archie has that infectious love of both the game and life that I think we all sort of warm to. Probably myself and Andy Harper might be a little bit more serious in many ways. But you need that variety. It wouldn't do to have a team full of Archie Thompsons, just as it wouldn't do to have a team full of Simon Hills or Andy Harpers. So you need that blend, and hopefully we've got that.
All right, as mentioned at the start of the episode, we're going to run through the A-League season. So I know I do get a lot of A-League listeners and football fans across the country, so this one is a bit of a special for you. And a big part of this episode, I was like, who's going to be the best person to preview this with me? And Simon Hill, there's no better. So Simon, we're going to run through each team, go through a few of the criteria of what we think is going to make them good or not so good for this season, or the challenges that they may come into, and the perspectives that they all have around them. Is there anything, though, before we jump in particular that you're most excited about for the new season?
I think apart from obviously the new broadcast deal, I think the arrival of Daniel Sturridge has probably given the competition a little bit of a shot in the arm. It's been a while since we've had a big name marquee. We were just talking about that before. And Sturridge is certainly that. Now, obviously, there's a couple of caveats to it. Is he fit? Can he refine his best form? What's his mental state about his approach to the A-League? If all of the above are present and correct, then he should tear this competition up, given the level that he's played at, and obviously, hopefully, put some bums on seats. So he's certainly one of the things I'm optimistic about for the new season.
Me too. I hope obviously a Manchester City product as well, I believe. So I'm hopeful football fans in this country grasp how big of a signing that is at his age. And I think he's still got a bit of point to prove, just the way he sort of fizzled out of the Premier League. But I want to start with the reigning premiers, Melbourne City. Would you say they're still the team to beat?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you look at the fact that normally A-League clubs have quite large turnovers season on season, and Melbourne City haven't. They've essentially kept almost the entire squad that they had last year. I think Adrian Luna's possibly one of the exceptions. He's gone elsewhere, but they've repatriated Matthew Leckie, and you look at the front three that they've got. So they've got Leckie, Naboot, and McLaren. Now, if there is a better front three in the A League, I'm yet to see it. Now, obviously, that doesn't say that they're going to all fire on all cylinders from day one. And injuries and fitness and form are always, the imponderables. But on paper, at least, which is all we've got to go on at the moment, because the teams haven't played any competitive games, you look at Melbourne City, and I think the depth of their squad, allied to the quality of their squad, probably makes them the outstanding favourites.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think it's going to be the A-League Salah, Mane, Firmino combination, potentially that combo, if it does gel. One you mentioned Luna, who's obviously part of the club, but I thought a huge loss for them would be Craig Noone, in the sense of, I think last year he I don't know if he was leading assist getter, but definitely most chances created. And for someone like a Jamie McLaren, that's a bit of a heaven state for them. But you touched on his name, but they didn't sort of put their heads down Melbourne City. They just went and got the Socceroo captain in Matthew Leckie. What do you reckon his impact will be even more broadly on the A-League? Do you think, I think he's only 30, 31, so I think he's still got some really good years ahead of him. What's your perspective on him coming back home?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, he is a good age, so he's still got plenty to contribute. I was probably a touch surprised that he chose to come back. I think COVID might have played a part in that. I know quite a few footballers, and yet, strangely enough, Europe is probably more open and free in many ways than Australia is at the moment. But historically, throughout this pandemic, Australia's done pretty well with it, and we've been able to live relatively freely. Yeah. So maybe that had a part to play in his decision. He's been away from Australia for 10 years as well, and footballers are human. But they miss home, they miss their family, they miss their friends. Sometimes they feel as though they've done all they can do in Europe. So, but I think he's still got plenty to offer. As you rightly point out, he was named the Socceroos captain, although of course couldn't play in the last few qualifiers because of the pandemic situation and quarantine rules. But I think he will be a huge weapon for Melbourne City this season, particularly in combination with those other two, McLaren and Naboot, probably playing either McLaren. It's a scary front three for the rest of the competition. And I suppose the only question is, given how well they did last season, the two young kids, Stefan Kolakowski and Marco Tilio, who were a big part of that title-winning team, particularly in the finals, are they going to get any game time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't even think of that. That's a really
I don't know. Yeah. But that's a nice problem for Paddy Kisnorbo to have.
Definitely. And one thing I do like about them, and obviously Kisnorbo, from a coaching perspective, would be pleased with it. I think in the A-League, there's always quite a high volume of turnover in squads coming into each season. Melbourne City seem to have a bit more stability based around that, which I think that continuity is really, really important. Jamie McLaren, can he be stopped? Do you think he's going to keep going above and beyond?
Probably not, to be honest. In A-League terms, I mean, he's a 20-goal a season man, isn't he? He always has been since he first emerged with Perth and then at Brisbane. Obviously, it didn't quite work out for him overseas, and he's another one that sort of came back at an age where you thought, that's interesting. But Jamie's a Melbourne boy. He's very close to his family. Seems very settled at Melbourne City. It's not affected his Socceroos' chances. And, the thing with Jamie is you put the ball in the right area for him, he'll find the back of the net. Yeah, he's just regular as clockwork. So I have no doubts that so long as he stays fit and he gets the service, he'll bang in another 20 this season minimum.
There you go. Death, taxes and 20 goals a season for Jamie.
That's it.
All right, if we move across the city to arguably the biggest club in the A-League, which... in Melbourne Victory, I'm talking about here. I mean, they encompassed a lot of challenge last year. We saw a bit of a crisis point when Grant Brebner left the club, and obviously a huge turnover in players. They've gone and got one of the most stabilised coaches this domestic league seen in regards to Tony Popovic, whose record in domestic football speaks for itself. What do you see his experience and, I guess, tenure around the game in this country bringing to Melbourne Victory?
Well, in a nutshell, a much better season than they had last year, which won't be hard. Let's be difficult, given that they got the wooden spoon. I expect Victory to be challenging up near the top this season.
Really?
That's the impact of Tony Popovich,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I know that he's changed the squad. It's almost unrecognisable from last year.
It's huge.
But quality that he has brought in again on paper, because we haven't seen them in games as yet, and the question mark, I guess, against the likes of Matt Sporanovic, Jason Davidson, who haven't played an awful lot of football over the last 12, 18 months, or in Matt's case, not at all. Are they fit? Are they going to be able to deal with the rigors of week in, week out football? They're going to have Robbie Cruz and Marco Rojas, who both had injuries as well last season, coming back. Can they stay the pace? Are we going to see the best of Ben Falami? How good are the foreigners? Yeah. I read good things about Ivan Kelava and Ramon Marchand, but we don't know. They could be Bessart Berisha. They could be Mario Jardel. That's the most exciting thing for me at this point of the year, is you just don't know. Yeah. And I remember last year looking at some of Victory's signings from overseas, Rudy Gested, Jacob Butterfield, thinking, those guys are good quality. They're good players. And they were garbage. Not the players, but the team in general were just garbage throughout the whole year. So you never can quite tell. But I think with Popovich at the helm, there is no way he will cop a season like they had last year. So I think Victory will be top 4 minimum.
Yeah, that's a huge call from where they were last year. But I tend to agree with you. And one thing I note with Popper's teams is how focused and how defensively strong they are all the time. They're like, for instance, last year Victory conceded the most goals in the league. That's definitely not going to happen
this year.
Just absolutely, that's a guarantee, But we mentioned some of the names, and like, you can tell it's an area that he's focused on in regards to bolstering the defence. The names we've got: Sporanovic, Davidson, Guerrier, Hamill, and I think Miranda, from a pedigree perspective, looks like a really, really formidable centre back that potentially could come in and play the role that we've seen the other, Del Pierre's type sort of impact the squad. One thing you furtherly mentioned was the strike force around Victory. Now, Robbie Cruz has done so much at Melbourne Victory and in this country, and obviously abroad as well. His impact coming back from injury, do you think that we can kind of see him get to the level we've seen him before? Do you think it's going to be challenging?
Well, I don't see why not. I mean, Robbie's got all the tools in his kit bag. The problem is with Robbie is that his body has not worked properly over the last couple of years. So if he can get his body right, he's still such an asset. He's still quick, as is Rojas as well. He still knows how to score goals. I would imagine if everybody's fit, he'd probably play sort of as a 10 in behind the new signing Francesco Margiotta, who again comes with a very decent pedigree. So you look at that, and with Rojas on one of the flanks as well. Yeah, I mean, there could be goals there for Victory, but as you rightly point out, Tony Popovich sets his teams up first and foremost to be solid defensively. It was the same at the Wanderers. It was the same at Perth. So I think Victory will have a good base from which to build. And I think it'll be an exciting season for Victory.
Yeah, I've got a feeling the derbies are going to be back to full flight this year. And there you go, from Simon Hill. Optimism in the air for Melbourne Victory. If we head out to GMHBA Stadium, Western United, relatively new franchise. They're entering their second season. I thought last year on paper, I was excited to see what they were going to do. And I thought they would catch a few people off guard, particularly, playing in Geelong. It's a bit of an annoying travel, good squad, good coach, but it didn't really click. I guess coming into the second season, there's sort of been a bit of a fresh view. They've got some older players out, new coach. I mean, how do you see things changing down there for the Western United?
Well, it is all change for Western. Obviously, John Aloisi is now in charge. What I would say is, and I've not got all the names in front of me, but the 5 overseas players that they've signed, particularly Christian, who was a junior at Inter, played first team games for Inter in Serie A. They look to have arguably the best batch of foreign players. And again, it's on paper. It doesn't necessarily work, but in terms of their CVs and their quality in terms of their history, Western United have some of the best overseas players in the competition. And as we all know in this league, if you get your foreigners right, that's no disrespect to the Aussies, but you get your foreigners right, they're supposed to lift the level. So, if they deliver, then Western could be a threat. The biggest problem for Western United, and we all know this, is this constant traipsing around the country to play home games and playing in Geelong one week, playing in Ballarat the next, then it's Launceston, then it's Amy Park, and then it's somewhere else, Whitten Oval. Really, they've got to start building this stadium. That was why they were brought into the A-League. And I think it impacts. I remember speaking to Andrew Durante the back end of last season, and he said, look, it's not at the start of the campaign, but by the end of the season, when you don't have a home base, you're struggling to adapt every single week. And that's before you take into account the away games that they have to play. So, yeah, it's not an easy situation for John Aloisi to come into. And of course, they've got a small fan base as well, which is difficult to build when you're constantly on the road.
Correct.
So all those things could impact upon Western United. But in terms of their playing roster, I think they should be okay. They should be challenging for the six as a bare minimum.
Yeah, agreed. It's almost like when you touch on that, it's almost like they're playing away games every week at times due to their circumstances, which is rough, right? On top of it, and I do want to touch on a couple of the imports, but overall, I thought some of the experience they brought in from an A-League perspective is quite healthy for the squad too. The turnover they had in their starting 11, but Jamie Young, Wenzel Halls, Toplos Stanley, Kilkenny, you'd think some of those guys would really add to that starting 11 and spine to help steer the ship and obviously support the incoming imports to really sort of propel their performances in the A-League. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. You need that A-League experience, and Nikolai, in particular, is a very strong presence at the back. Neil Kilkenny, for me, has been one of the outstanding midfielders in the competition over the last 4 or 5 years. Quite why he's not been involved in any Socceroos camps is a bit of a mystery to me, to be honest. I don't know if that's a personality clash or whatever it is. But anyway, he brings very, very good quality into that midfield area. So as I say, I think overall, Johnny's got a decent squad. Obviously, he's lost Bessart Berisha, which, you're always going to lose out in terms of goals when you lose a striker of that caliber, but he was probably coming towards the end of his days. Diamante is still there. Yep. He, for me, is still the most exciting player in the competition.
Personality, charisma.
It's just a joy to watch. Yeah. Just a joy to watch. Yeah.
So do you think it'll take time for John Aloisi to settle in there and brew success, or do you think, and we're going to touch on later, MacArthur type sort of season where they can just jump out of the gate and grab it?
It's difficult to know. I think we'll get a better idea. Their round one game is against Melbourne Victory. And Tony Popovic's first game, where he'll want to really, set his stamp. And Western United have, traditionally done well against Victory in their short history. So that's a good early sort of indicator as to where they're at. But it's, as I say, at this point of the year, I always find it so difficult to predict what's going to happen.
In this league too, because the A-League...
We haven't seen anything.
Yeah, and the A-League, I think, is hard to predict on a good day when you've seen 10, 15 games. But I want to move across the ditch to the Phoenix, and one of the grounds I never liked playing at, but it was always good for a night out, I must say. I don't know what it was like for you as a commentator going down there, but it is a tough place to play. And I think Phoenix have always punched above their weight, in my opinion, in regards to the personnel that they get and where they run on the league. I think they do really good balance of getting a good import, a couple of young Aussie players and really strong Kiwi players. What's your sort of perspective on how they're gonna fare this year?
Yeah, I'm not sure about Phoenix, to be honest. But then we always say this about this club at the start of the season. We always think, oh, no, they're going to be near the bottom, Phoenix. And Ufuk Talay and Mark Rudin before him, to be fair, have proven very adept at working with limited budgets and bringing in players who are very, very good. I mean, we saw this with, Ulysses Davila, who's now gone on to play for MacArthur, obviously. Yeah, that's a big loss. And they have lost some big players again.
Hemed as well.
Stephen Taylor has gone. Toma Hemet has gone to Western Sydney Wanderers. So you look at those departures, and on the other scale, Gary Hooper's come back. Callan Elliott has been repatriated from Zante. But there's not too many. And you think, are they going to struggle? But I remember saying the same thing a couple of years ago. They lost David Williams, they lost Roy Krishna, they lost Sarpreet Singh, and you thought, where's the goals going to come from?
Correct.
And all of a sudden, they signed Davila and Hooper, and bang, they were great to watch, and they were competitive. So I don't rule out Ufuk Talay again pulling the rabbit out of the hat. I can't say in terms of their off-season signings, I'm hugely impressed with the depth they seem to have.
Yeah.
But he's a good coach, is Ufi. Again, the biggest problem for Wellington is the fact that in the early part of the season, they've got to come over to Australia and play in the bubble. Yep. So that, again, they're away from New Zealand. So they don't have that natural advantage of, okay, you've got to travel to our joint, which is in a different country. And those, wet and windy conditions that you probably played in at the Cake Tin, which are never pleasant for Australian teams.
Not at all.
They'll get that eventually. I think probably January, February, they'll head back to New Zealand. But in the early part of the season, again, they're going to have to, be based out of New South Wales, which is not ideal for them.
Yeah, that could make or break their season. That's a really good point, because that is their advantage, their home games. And you touched on Davia, I think one of the best players in the league last season, along with Hemed from a goals perspective for them. Gary Hooper coming back, though, I think he's going to have to fire for them to really get back to sort of any sort of form and be in contention for finals. Moving out west, and we touched on some of the big, your excitement for the league. And when I think of Perth now, this obviously Perth to Wellington's funny, the biggest domestic travel for a football game in the world. But two things stand out to me is Castro leaving and Sturridge coming. That's going to impact the team obviously on both ends, but I think a positive overall for Perth landing Sturridge.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be. And, Diego Castro was a wonderful player, not just for the Glory, but for the league as well, and probably underappreciated because he played over in the West. He didn't get an awful lot of headlines on the Eastern Seaboard, where most of the game is based. But his contribution should be recognised because he's one of the greats, along with Roich and Berisha for me.
Yeah, do you put Castro up there from what you've seen? Yeah, really. Yeah.
One of the top 3 or 4. Milos Nukovic will be up there as well, I think.
So too.
But, I'm not putting them in any particular order, but along with Roich, Berisha, Diego Castro, certainly for impact and longevity, because he was there for 6 years. Yeah. So we should pay tribute to him. Having said that, Daniel Sturridge, again, on paper, is a fantastic signing. His pedigree, the clubs he's played for, Manchester City, Chelsea, Liverpool, played for England at major tournaments, scored goals in the Premier League, but he's not played for a while. What's his body like? What's his mentality like? How's he going to deal with the travel? How is he going to deal with playing in summer on rock hard pitches? Yeah. It's not for everybody.
Perth, I tell you.
You've got to have the right mentality and the right body to be able to deal with all that stuff. So I'm not saying he's going to fail. Jeez, I hope he doesn't, because it would be fantastic for the league if he was a big success. The other conundrum for Richard Garcia is he's now got Daniel Sturridge, he's got Andy Keogh, he's got Bruno Fornaroli.
I know.
I don't know how he fits all those 3 in the same team.
I was going to ask you about that. Can the aging, obviously the formidable partnership of Fornaroli and Keogh, I mean, it's aging now. Can that still fire? I mean, the balance Sturridge in that, it's a good problem to have, but I knowing Fornaroli's, tenure in the A-League and Keogh, they're not going to want to sit on the pine for anyone.
No, and they're going to have people who are willing to do a lot of running behind them. Let's be honest. But that's again, it's a nice problem I think for Richard Garcia to have. And just on some of his other signings, what I should say, and this could be key for them as well. We said that they'd lost Neil Kilkenny, who is a big player for them, but they gained Brandon O'Neill.
Great player.
Who's a very, very good footballer, and now at the peak of his career. and also Brad Jones to provide competition for Liam Reddy between the posts. I think he had a bit to do with actually getting Sturridge over the line as well, because they were teammates at Liverpool. So he's made some good signings as Richard Garcia.
Yeah.
Again, I think Perth, bare minimum, they'll be challenging for the top six, but I think they'll expect to be a little bit higher.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how they go. It's Richard Garcia's first full season as coach as well. I think he's built a squad that can compete. So I'll be looking forward to seeing them, and definitely Sturridge I think is going to get a few bums off seats. If we come down south to my old team, Adelaide United. Now, I really like their squad. I like the fact that they've got the balance of young and exciting talent, and then they've brought in the experience quality in sort of the spinal areas of the ground in Isaias and obviously Jakobsen. I think if those two stay fit, it gives them every chance to be competitive like they were last season.
Yeah, look, I think the Reds will be competitive. We've seen this already in the FFA Cup, which is a competition they've virtually made their own. I have to say, I was a little bit surprised to see Al Hassan Toure depart. I think that's an interesting one. Obviously, now puts a lot of responsibility on his brother Mohamed Toure and Kusini Yengi, that they could have big seasons. George Blackwood has returned as well from Oldham. So they've still got a bit of competition, but they've lost some experienced players, some good players. Ryan Strain has gone to play in Israel. Jordan Elsey, Tommy Juric, Michael Maroney has retired, and Al Hassan Toure, as I said, has gone to MacArthur. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm not 100% convinced that they've got the goods to win it. Again, I think they'll certainly challenge for the top six. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't. And they've still got Ben Halloran, who's a terrific player. Isaias will return to steady the ship in midfield and probably help develop Louis Dorigo as well, who I think is emerging into a fine player in that midfield role. So I think Carl's got a decent balance, as you say. Is it going to be good enough to win the comp?
Yeah, I've got my questions as well. I think one person I did want to talk about was the captain, young captain in that, Stefan Mork. I thought he had a belter of a start to the season last year. I think he banged in like 6 or 7 goals in as many games. I think if he stays fit, it gives him just a bit of X factor, goals from midfield.
That's the key.
Yeah.
If he stays fit, and at the moment, again, he's out with a problem. He's missed a couple of the cup games, so whether he's going to be fit for the start of the season or not, I don't know. But that's been an issue for Stefan. He's a great player, but that's been his problem over the last 12 months, staying fit for that regular, run of games.
Agreed. Now, before we jump into the Sky Blue, just a quick comment I wanted to get. We can't not talk about Adelaide without acknowledging the Josh Cavallo story and breakthrough. I mean, just from your visibility of the global game, how big was that in regards to, I guess, the fanfare, the attention, the media, the spotlight that received?
Massive. And I expected it to be that way. I was lucky enough that Josh and Adelaide United took me into their confidence. They wanted me to write the story that went on the Channel 10 website and across the A-League platforms. Wow. So I knew of the story before it came out, and obviously we're trying to keep it quiet for when Josh was ready to go public. Okay. But yeah, look, I've fully anticipated that would be the response, because bizarrely he's the only player playing at senior professional level in a top league around the world who's come out as gay. I mean, statistically,
it's impossible.
The law of averages says that that's a complete nonsense. Yeah. But it shows just how taboo it is in the world of men's football. And I hope it, opens the door for others to feel comfortable enough to come out and be, as Josh said himself, their authentic selves. Because it must have been really difficult, that burden for him to carry all those years. And look, Jake, you'll know better than me, the banter in dressing rooms in the A-League and around the world. It's probably all around, because you're young, fit, healthy men with a bit of money, which nightclub are you going to, who's the lucky girl, who you seeing, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. It's a long time since I've been in my early 20s, but I remember it. So, Josh must have felt, pretty isolated with all that sort of banter going on.
Yeah.
So I'm pleased for him that he's been able to be honest about who he is. It shouldn't affect his football, and to be fair, he had a good season last year with the Reds.
He's a tidy player,
So
definitely.
I hope it doesn't impact upon him that way, but I'm pretty sure it won't. He seems a pretty level-headed young kid.
Well said, Simon Hill. And definitely shout out to Josh Cavallo. I think that movement is actually it's so big, it's going to save lives. So good on him for that. Sydney FC, for me, arguably the best team in the country for the last 5-6 years. I don't think too many people can attest to that. They've managed to maintain success, though, and it's been proven even with the change of coaches and obviously, throughout the period, there's obviously been key players that have moved and gone. There seems like a bit of a culture shift in that environment over those last 5-6 years, which probably Graham Arnold might have been central to when he was coaching. For you, you're obviously closer to them being based in Sydney. What's sort of been the special sauce that's kept them in contention across the championships over the last few seasons?
Well, look, apart from that stability and continuity that you alluded to, because obviously Steve Corica worked under Graham Arnold, so that, they didn't change too much. But essentially, it was good recruitment, signing good players. They rarely miss in the transfer market. Sometimes you can look at A-League clubs, and we talked about Victory earlier on, and on paper they seemed very good signings, and yet probably 3, 4, 5 of them just didn't work. Now with Sydney, you can rarely say that. When they sign a player, they normally get it spot on. I think the only one that I can remember in recent years was Job van der Linden, the Dutch guy who came in that just didn't work. Yep. But aside of that, you look at Lafondra, you look at Babou, they're both back for second stints. Milos Ninkovic has been there for donkey's years.
Yeah,
they get it right more often than not. Having said that, my concern for Sydney a little bit this year, and I think we saw this in part last year, even though they got to another grand final, they just come back to the pack a little bit. It is an aging squad. You look at Babou, Lafondra, I've mentioned already, Ninkovic, Alex Wilkinson is, 36, 37. So they just, Michael Zullo's got injuries. So they're just starting to maybe get it a little bit long in the tooth in general. So, in that regard, their new signings are paramount. And you're seeing this with, so James Donachie has come in to replace Ryan McGowan. Again, if he can perform to that level that McGowan did last year, then Sydney will go okay. Connor O'Toole, I think, is there to provide Joel King with some competition at left back. Where that leaves Michael Zullo, I don't know. The key signing for me, no disrespect to Elvis Kamsoba, I'm fascinated to see how he goes, by the way.
Me too.
He's got all the tools in his kit bag, but just hasn't been able to put them all together in the right order for victory. Yep. Maybe the switch to Sydney will help him. But the key signing for me is the return of Max Burgess, who's a player I love. Particularly during his days with Western United, he's got that lovely loping, almost lackadaisical style about him, with his socks sort of half rolled down his shins. He doesn't necessarily look like a footballer in the same way that Chris Waddle didn't necessarily look like a footballer. But what a left peg he's got.
Yeah.
He can set up goals, he can score goals. He could be the key. And again, he's not played a lot of football over the last 12 months, but he could be the key to Sydney maintaining that rage near the top of the table. I think he's a terrific signing if they've got his body right ahead of the new campaign.
Well said. Yeah, I think in contention for finals again. And it'll be interesting to see if they're going to compete with the Melbourne City like they did last season. Moving out west to arguably the football community and population of this country, where the following around Western Sydney and more broadly football in general in Sydney's west is just something to behold. Carl Robinson seems to come across as a highly regarded coach, at least from the players that I know have worked with him, particularly with his form at Newcastle, which broke hearts when he left, obviously the clause in his contract. I think he's had a bit more time now in this preseason to build a squad that maybe he's looking forward to working with, signing Petratos, Hemed, Antonis, particularly Petratos and Antonis coming back, I think in their prime is going to be exciting to see. I mean, what's your perspective on how that's going to impact the squad?
Well, look, I did a radio interview with Carl on SEN last week, and jokingly said to him at the start, but although I wasn't really joking because it's reality, I said that if you have another season like you did last time, I don't think we'll be speaking to you this time next year.
True. Very true.
And it's true. He knows that. He's under pressure this year. Is Carl? There were big things expected last season, and it just did not pan out that way. Now, he's had another real good go in the transfer market. Apart from the ones that you mentioned, Adama Traore has come in from Victory. Reece Williams, who's going to be his captain, has returned to Australia. That's a very good signing for me.
Yep.
And a couple of others that we probably don't know too much about. Kejiro Ogawa from Japan, and the goalkeeper Thomas Machias, who's arrived from Turkey, although he's Spanish. It's interesting. I'm uncertain about the Wanderers.
Yeah,
on paper, they look decent, but we've said this for a couple of years now that this has got to be the year for the Wanderers. This has got to be the year for the Wanderers, and it just hasn't happened. They're the only club in the A-League that hasn't played finals football in the last 4 years, which for a club of their stature is simply not good enough. So I think you'll probably find that even if they have a poor start, the first 5 or 6 games, Carl will be seriously under the pump to keep his job.
It could be,
and that's the way it works with big clubs.
Yeah, definitely. They are a massive club. We can't underestimate that. It'd be great to see the powerful home atmosphere sort of get back to what it was in the early days with the RBB and so.
Would be nice.
Yeah, because I think that will actually help them. Definitely, from a calling perspective, I assume it must be fun when you're around that craziness. No doubt. I want to kind of speak on MacArthur and spend just some time here because for me, when we spoke of Western United earlier, coming into the league so fresh, and naturally you think it might take a club to take some time to establish and get going, but MacArthur, pardon the pun, took the bull by the horns, and had made finals. Were kind of my smoky to potentially even get to the final and challenge Melbourne City or Sydney at one point. Are you impressed by the signings and the calibre of players they've brought in? It seems like they've done quite a bit of work in the transfer market.
Yeah, look, they've signed top quality. We've already spoken about Ulysses Davila, who comes in from Wellington. Craig Noon, we've talked about as well, in from Melbourne City. Danny De Silva from the Mariners. Tommy Juric from Adelaide, Jordan Much, Western Sydney Wanderers, Al Hassan Toure, and Philip Curto. I mean, goodness me, they are terrific players.
Yeah, top players.
And I think on that basis, MacArthur, should challenge. They've lost a few as well. Matt Derbisher's gone. Denny Jonro, who's now with the Socceroos. Markel Susayeta has retired along with Bunya Echevarria. So the 2 Spaniards have gone.
Mark Milligan as well.
Ivan Franjic, Mark Milligan, and Adam Federici.
Yeah, big change.
And the latter 2 really are the big question mark against MacArthur, because there is some talk that all is not well behind the scenes in terms of the backroom staff. I can't go into too much detail because I don't know the honest truth about it, but there are rumours that there are some problems, which is why Mark Milligan has opted to step away from the club. I don't know if it played a part in Adam Federici's decision to retire, to be fair, because the official reason was injury. But it seems a little odd to me that he would, after being named club captain, he would retire within a week or so. So that's the only caveat I have against MacArthur. But again, on paper, their squad is absolutely terrific, and Ante Milicic, smart coach. And they should definitely challenge.
Yeah, agreed. I'm excited to see. It'd be interesting. I mean, if they can go one better than last year, that's going to be a major shift. And credit to them coming into the league and taking it by storm in year 1. It's not easy. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out for them. One of the surprise packets for last season for me was Central Coast. I thought they're a bit like a Wellington in a sense of you're not sure what you're going to get. Obviously, they had some really strong years under Graham Arnold, when they were sort of challenging for premierships and winning premierships as such. They've always had their financial troubles. They've had some lackluster performances for the last couple of years, but last year was almost like a shift in confidence to the way they performed. Do you think they can continue that going forward this season?
It's a $64 million question, isn't it? And I honestly I don't know.
Yeah.
Alan Stajic obviously quit on the back of their most successful season in years, which seemed an odd decision, both in terms of Stajic himself and also the club, allowing him to go. Nick Montgomery has taken over. Obviously, we know Nick as a very good player during his days with the Mariners and Sheffield United for many years in England. Yep. He's been an unknown quantity as a coach. You look at the quality of his signings, apart from the players that we know, like Nikolai Muller, who's making the journey up from the Wanderers, Storm Roos been repatriated, if you like. Of the others, Moresh, the Brazilian, Benny Nkololo, the Frenchman, Sai Goddard, Japanese, different. Again, that they could be Berishas, they could be Jardels. Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah, I agree.
I hope it works out for them. On the debit side, they've lost a fair bit of quality. Danny De Silva, Jack Clisby, Alu Kuol, Jani Stensness, who was so important for them alongside Oli Bozanic in that midfield last season. So, yeah, it's a bit of a, I don't know, a toss of the coin. Yeah, they could challenge for the 6. They could be rock bottom. I just don't know.
Yeah, I think some of their signings from imports perspective is quite interesting because they're quite young, and their experience anyway. It doesn't seem as great as some of the imports we've seen. But the spine of Central Coast, I will say, is probably one of their pivotal points that hasn't really changed. Burugiti, Tongyik, Bozanic, obviously Simon, just for some reason, just keeps turning up every year when you keep doubting him.
He does.
He doesn't give up, that man, and credit to him. But we touched on the Melbourne derby coming back to life this year. I've got a feeling the M3 derby might be coming back to life as well, with Arthur Papas coming into the Newcastle Jets. Knowing Arthur, and I've seen some sort of footage of him, he's definitely pushing a mentality to focus on winning. And they've practically got a new squad as well from the previous season. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there when they've ripped out that sort of spine that we've been so used to seeing at Newcastle. What's your feeling and sentiment around them?
I'm excited for the Jets. I think Arthur Papas is a very smart coach. This is just the beginning of the project. I don't think they're going to win the competition this year. They might not even make the 6. But I don't think they'll struggle as badly as they did last season. I think Arthur will make sure of that the club is in a more stable condition than it was this time 12 months ago, although they're still waiting on new owners, which can't happen soon enough. But again, in terms of the quality of some of his signings, Matty Yerman is a very good signing. So too is Jordan Elsey. There's your 2 centre backs, right off.
Captain and vice captain, I think, both of them.
Yeah, very experienced players. Looking forward to seeing the return of Dylan Murnane, who we haven't seen in the A-League for many years. He's been playing over in Finland. Sammy Silveira, who of course we remember from the Mariners, he's been over in Portugal. Eli Babal, another name that
is a mystery to me. Radar. Yeah, I played. I tell you what, I will say on Eli Babal.
Where's he been?
Yeah, probably with Mats Baranovic. But I'm excited to see him back. I'm glad he's got a second chance anyway.
And as I say, I think the Jets will have a better campaign. I honestly don't think that they can win it, but I think this is just the first building block for Arthur and the new Jets over the next few years. And I hope they give him a good long opportunity to prove himself, because he's waited a long time, Arthur, and I think he's good enough.
Yeah, that's what I was going to touch on. I think they're going to take time to find their groove under Arthur. But one thing you also said, that you're going to have to earn your points against Newcastle, because if anything around Arthur, his team's going to be compact and well drilled. So it'll be interesting to see how they go. Final team, one that I thought had a very strong year last year, was Brisbane Roar. And I have to say, knowing the boys around the squad and even from the outside, from a performance perspective, there seems to be quite a good unity in that squad. Obviously under Warren Moon, and they've seemed to retain majority of their squad. I think the only real sort of pivotal player that was in form last season they've lost was Jamie Young, which no doubt goalkeeping is a big position. Are you excited to see where they can go this season? Or challenge them? Do you think they can get above where they were last year?
Yeah, well, we've had a little glimpse of Brisbane in the Cup as well. They beat the Lions the other day, and I was very impressed with the young striker that they got, Cyrus Demi, who scored a hat-trick, 3 very, very good finishes. And that's been one of the areas that they've, struggled in recent years. I mean, they signed a whole load of strikers last year, and I don't think one of them particularly delivered. Maybe he's the key. Sometimes you give youngsters an opportunity and they take it. Also fascinated, talking to youngsters, fascinated to see how young Jez Lofthouse goes. I've watched him in the NPL in Queensland. Very tricky winger, loves to score goals, can cut in, play on the left flank or play on the right. Or even centrally, he's a real excitement machine. So I'm fascinated to see how he goes. Luke Ivanovic has gone north from Sydney FC. Again, a young man with a lot of potential. Nikola Miliuznic has been repatriated from Denmark.
Yep.
So hopefully, Warren's trying to find different solutions this year to that lack of goals. Juan Lascano, an Argentine who's been playing in Russia, is probably their most eye-catching signing in terms of his CV. Again, I don't think Brisbane will win the competition, but I think they can challenge for the top 6 as a minimum. Warren Moon's, done a decent job up there, and I think they can be in the finals and maybe go a long way in the Cup. This is the first time they've been in the quarterfinals,
right?
So that all goes well for their season ahead.
Jay O'Shea looks like a real player to me. I think he complements that. They were kind of a hard-running squad always, and a fit squad, Brisbane, but he's got a little bit of class that supports that. I guess that bit of X factor you'd want from a player coming from overseas as well.
Yeah, look, the Irishman's been there a couple of seasons now, and he's a nicely balanced player, and he works hard as well. He doesn't negate the defensive side of his game. He sort of floats around those little pockets, in between the defense and the midfield, the opposition's defense and their midfield. So he's an intelligent player. And I think the one disappointing thing, and again, I'm going back to the goals thing. Jay O'Shea in his last year with Bury, which I know is the English lower leagues, much lower probably standard than the A League, but I think he scored something like 15 goals at that level, and I think he only scored one last season, 1 or 2, and I think one of those was a penalty. So that's been the issue for Brisbane is finding that regular goal scorer week in, week out, but. That's why the strikers get paid the big bucks. And maybe Cyrus Demi is the man. Who knows?
Let's go. We'll see. Hopefully you're calling his name quite a lot this season for them. A quick little segment to round out, Simon Hill, and I'm excited for this one because the Lace Them Up Quick 5-5, that the fans, the subscribers, they love listening to this. But pretty much we're going to shoot you 5 questions, instinctive answers. Hopefully they shouldn't test you because you've been around the league a long time and you're preparing for it right now.
Never know.
You never know. All right, let's go. Team to win it all.
Melbourne City.
Melbourne City. Yep, agreed. Player of the season.
Player of the season.
Johnny Warren medalist, I guess you can call it.
Okay. Let's be optimistic and say Daniel Sturridge.
There you go. I like it. Okay, that is a big call. Well, this might follow on from that, but I was just about to say signing of the season. Who do you predict?
Signing of the season. I'll go for Ulysses Davila at MacArthur. I think he's a super player.
Agreed.
And providing those off-field issues don't set them back, then I think he'll have a good season.
Alrighty. Who's your surprise packet for the season from a club point of view? Who do you think is going to maybe overachieve to naturally what potentially people are expecting?
Well, last season it was easy, wasn't it? Because that was the Mariners. This season it's more difficult to pick. I would say, given that Victory won, in inverted commas, the wooden spoon last year, let's call them the biggest improvers.
You mentioned Jez Lofthouse, but is there anyone else that catches your eye from a young player perspective that we can watch out for this season?
Well, look, Australia is always on the lookout for goal scorers. So I'll go for the 2 young kids up front. One for Brisbane, I've mentioned him already, Cyrus Demi. I mean, this is a long bow to say that he's going to be in the soccer. He literally only just started his career. I'm sorry, Cyrus. I'm not trying to put big pressure on you.
We love it.
I did ask the question. So I'll go for him. And Patrick Wood has impressed me as well at Sydney FC. He's only had limited opportunities, obviously, because he's still young. But yeah, he looks like a natural goal scorer. So those two, you've had the mockers put on your
There
career.
you go.
Sorry, boys.
The biggest caller in the game in the country's put it on you two. No. Simon Hill, honestly, it's been an absolute joy having you on the podcast. I think all the fans tuning in appreciate that you're back in the game and your sentiment around each team. And for all those listening to their clubs, you've heard it from the man who's going to be calling the games this season. And we're looking forward to a big season back in the A-League with new broadcast teams and obviously refreshed squads across the league that I think is going to be a very close and tight season as we expect. So thank you, Simon, for thank you so much for coming on, and I'll forgive you for wearing that Man City top.
Pleasure, Jake. Nice to talk to you again after all this time, mate. All the best.
Thanks, Simon. Cheers.